All right, everyone, I think we're going to get started here. So welcome everyone to the 7th Daily Gwei AMA series. Great to see you all here. If you want to participate in the AMA and ask a question, all you need to do is raise your hand throughout it. There's a little icon on the bottom of your screen where you can raise your hand. I'll see the request up here on my screen, and I'll be able to invite you on to ask your question. And of course, I'll be answering the questions that were posted in the AMA series channel as well. And this will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube tomorrow. So if you have to leave early or anything like that, or come in late, all of it will be on YouTube and timestamped with all the questions and things like that. So definitely, that'll be available to you. Today we're going to get started by kind of inviting someone that reached out to me on the Discord up to discuss all the recent kind of like regulatory stuff that's been going on. I wouldn't consider myself an expert here. I've been following it as best as I can. But Dr. Drzymalas in the crowd here, in the audience, sorry, I should say, has offered to kind of like give us a rundown and kind of like speak to it. So, I'm going to invite him up now to the stage and we can get started with him. And then I'll just go into the questions from everyone else. All right, I think he's going to come up now. I've invited you to speak, so you should be able to come up. There we go. Awesome.
All right.
Hey, mate, how you going?
Good. How you doing, Anthony?
Good. Thanks so much for offering to kind of give us a rundown here. This should be really great. I think I saw some of the chat you were having with the other guys in the channel. I think it was overnight when I was sleeping. So yeah, great to have you here.
Well, I really appreciate it, and it's not often that my day job intersects with what I'm most interested in right now, which is crypto. But it's I thought I'd offer what thoughts I have while it's relevant. And the stuff that I've been seeing over the last couple of days, I think it's sort of like we're vacillating between panic and a little bit of feeling like we have it under control when we really don't, and things can move really quickly in the legislative branch of the United States, or they can move super slowly. So it's really hard to tell what's happening. But the one message that I want to give people, to people who are not living in the United States, you don't have to worry about anything. This is not relevant to you because this is I'm convinced, just as I'm sure everybody in the community is, that this is going to continue on and keep growing and keep being more and more important to more people in the world, no matter what any one country does, even if it's a powerful one like the United States. But if you're living in the United States, I actually think this is super important. And the one message that I want to give to you is that this is a really important juncture, this moment right now, and it's an opportunity. And the reason why is it's just a fundamental thing about how the Senate in particular, but how the legislature works in the United States as an institution and what its role is, that is super important to understand, and it's very difficult to understand unless you've been around it a lot. And that is, it's really there to address the concerns of the average person, right? So if you think about, well, a good way that I try to think about this is what type of entertainment and news is the average person consuming? So if you're watching Dancing with the Stars and you understand the type of person who's watching Dancing with the Stars, that's the person who is going to get their concerns addressed most by the government. And even more drilling down even more than that, there's just outside of the general voter, that there are constituencies that these elected officials know are super powerful. They control a lot of people, that they can message to a lot of people. They can activate a lot of people who will make their political decisions based on what that institution recommends. So, for example, the National Rifle Association, the NRA, is a very famous one, right? Where they may not represent uh, a majority of the American public, but their members are super rabid, and so everybody realizes that the National Rifle Association is a huge force in Washington D.C. because of that membership that they've built. And in reality, if you actually look at what's happening in the gun rights movement in the United States, and this is where I think I'm bringing this back to where the crypto community is. The NRA is now not really that powerful or important to a lot of people who are really care about gun rights, right? There are all these smaller organizations that have come up that have more of a trusting relationship with the real activists on gun rights in the United States. However, government attention is a lagging indicator. So to the government, it's still the NRA that's the most important one because they're still thinking about the last time that they had to engage with the constituency. And the last time they had to engage with the constituency, the NRA was top dog. So think about that when you're thinking about crypto as well, right? People don't realize, these senators have no way of knowing that thousands of people in their states who are their constituents are trading, are staking, are providing liquidity, are trying to start nodes. And what they need is to hear from us because the bar here is really low. They think that crypto is nothing. They think that that there are no voters who vote based on crypto. And so if we make an impact by calling and contacting them proactively in a large group of people, it's going to, there's a very low bar to make them think, wait a minute, this is actually something bigger than I thought. And that asymmetry of information is a huge opportunity for crypto right now. And I would have said, and I called my senators yesterday, and I can tell you exactly what I said, so you can have an idea of what to say. But I will say that today it's probably not a good idea to call your senators because even though they're voting today because they couldn't get it resolved, this legislation resolved yesterday, their offices are going to be closed. So you're just going to go straight to voicemail. So today I would recommend that you do something like I did, but do it on Twitter, which is to say, this is what I said when I called my senators. I said, hey, I live in Arlington, Virginia, which is where I live. And I told them my zip code, which is important, so that they know exactly where I am. And I told them that I run a small business and that I voted before. I'm a registered voter, and that I voted for the senators that I'm calling before, so that they know that I'm not just an enemy of theirs, that I actually am constructive and want to work with them and like them, right? So told them where I was. I told them that I'm a registered voter. I told them I voted for them before, and then I told them why it's so important that they go not with the compromise, quote unquote compromise amendment from Warner and Portman, but with the Toomey and Wyden and I forget the third senator, the original amendment, which was supposed to fix this legislation. And if you do that on Twitter and find your senators on Twitter, depending on which state you're in, that will make a huge impact today because they just want to go home, right? They're about to go on a month-long getting out of DC, going back, not on vacation, but to visit with their constituencies, to visit with their supporters, to visit with all the people who are in the states they represent. And they want to leave DC. It's really hot here. It's really humid. And this issue is just delaying their escape from this city. They want to go home. So they just want to deal with this. They don't even care about the outcome. So this is an annoyance to them, and so it really is a danger here that they'll make the wrong decision if they don't hear from the right people today. So that's all I'll say. If you want to ask any questions based on what I've said, Anthony, feel free. Otherwise, I'm happy to just leave after delivering my message. But thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for describing all of that for us. I think it's really important, and I think a lot of people are concerned right now about what's going on. And I think you put it really well. I think there is sometimes a bit of, I guess, a nihilism around this, where people think that calling, does nothing and it doesn't make any changes and anything like that. But I really do think you put it well, where you said that these people, they just don't know how big crypto is. Like, if you're in the ecosystem every day and you're on Twitter or whatever, you may think we're much bigger than what we are, but we're very tiny. We haven't penetrated really the real world, and especially not the world that these kind of like senators live in. Most of them have no idea how big this ecosystem is and how big its potential is. And as you said, like a lot of them just want to go home and things like that, so they're probably not too keen on learning about what proof of stake versus proof of work is on a Saturday. So I think you gave a great overview there about all of it. And yeah, I didn't really have any questions myself, but if anyone else does, I'm sure they can ask you in the Discord channel, and you'll be around to answer them, I assume.
Yes, I will. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and have great Saturday. It is Saturday where you are, right?
Yeah, still for another about 50 minutes.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, mate. See you later. Cool. All right. Well, I'll keep moving through the list of questions that I have here, but I'm also taking questions from the audience, obviously. So if you want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand. I'll invite you onto the stage and we'll get you up here. So the first question that is in the AMA channel came from Yo-E, who said, how do you evaluate the quality of a DAO and its governance? What are the specific attributes, structures, and red flags that you look for? So the fun thing about, I think, the DAO space right now is that there is so much experimentation going on that it really is like an open field of how to evaluate these sorts of things. But there are obviously some red flags, right? The things I kind of look for in a DAO is what the community's like. So the number one thing I always check is, okay, is this community like solely focused on the price of the token that's associated with this project, or that actually care about like the product itself? Because if you have a community that is just like super price sensitive and super price speculative, and all they really care about is pumping the token up, well, then you can be pretty sure that this community isn't really going to be involved with any kind of DAO stuff, and the DAO itself's not going to work, and it's just going to be like the core team doing things, and that doesn't make a good DAO, of course, right? So that's kind of like the first thing I look for, but I also look for like the structure of the DAO. I've spoken about it plenty of times before, but the index co-op is one of my favorite kind of DAOs because they have the structure down like very nicely. If you go in there, you'll see what I mean, like in their Discord channel or on their governance forum. But they essentially have this thing. It's kind of like, they're not the only ones that do this, but I'm close to the index co-op through my work with Set. But they have these things called working groups, which is basically like business departments. Like if you're a massive corporation, say, you have different like business units in your corporation that handle different things. You know, you might have a marketing department. You're going to have like your devs in another department. You're going to have business development in one other, and design and other sort of thing, right? But you all obviously talk to each other, but it's distinctly separate. And that's exactly what these DAOs have. They have these working groups. Whatever people want to work on, they can go there. And they just basically work independently, but also like they cross communicate with the rest of the working groups as well. So that's hard to get right. You know, organizing humans is not an easy task, and I've seen the Index Co-op do it really well as kind of like a newer DAO. MakerDAO is another one that's been working on this for quite a while. They have a bunch of working groups too. There's other newer DAOs like Yearn Finance, and Uniswap is a newer DAO. Uniswap's a funny case because I think their governance process is a bit messy right now. I think it's getting better over time. They do have different working groups and like grants programs as well. It's another thing that a lot of these DAOs have. But it is messy because there's a lot of drama that goes on, and that's kind of like another thing I look for is like how much drama is in this DAO. Like, how many disagreements are there on everything? Like, do these disagreements get resolved, or is it just constant like fighting, like infighting within the DAO? Is it like a toxic environment to be in? So really, I mean, the way to I guess like evaluate a quality of a DAO is the same as you would evaluate the quality of a company. Like if you go work for a new company and you notice that like the culture is toxic, right? Like the managers are always kind of like micromanaging everyone and making everyone feel like crap. The work that you're doing is boring and not fulfilling. Then it's kind of like the same thing as these DAOs. I think that's kind of like how I kind of look at things. But definitely my biggest red flag is always if the majority of the Discord channel, for example, is focused on price, I kind of lose interest, because at the end of the day, a price sensitive community is not a good community in my eyes, because then if the price goes down and the price doesn't do anything, you have these people that just leave, right? Because they're only interested in the price going up. They're called moon boys or whatever you want to call them on Twitter, like nicknames they have and sorts of things like that. So I think that's kind of like the number one thing I always look for. And it's funny because like with, if you can, Ethereum isn't a DAO, but if you like look at Ethereum and kind of like, you go on Twitter and you look at everyone tweeting about the price all the time, and it's not just Ethereum, it's about every other token. I think you have to separate that from the actual community, because a lot of people are going to tweet about the price, especially when it's going up, right? Even when it's going down, like if it's going up or down, it's getting tweeted about. But it's more about like the people actually working on the project and like what they're doing. Are they still working on it regardless of what the price is? Well, I mean, yes, that's very true for Ethereum, for example. Even though Ethereum's not a DAO, I think it's just a perfect example where a lot of the work, got done during the bear market. Like DeFi was born in the bear market. ETH2 was majority of it was developed, researched, and deployed during the bear market and things like that. And it's just the same for other kind of like projects, like DeFi projects like Avalanche, Synthetics, and things like that basically rode through 2018 and 2019 and even 2020. And their community, they grew through the bear market, and that was a community that wasn't price focused. They were focused on the actual project, and the price going up was just like a bonus for them. So that's kind of like what I look out for as a general kind of thing there. So hopefully that answers your first question. And you had a second question here, Yoey, where you say, also, what are the best examples of well-run DAOs today in your opinion? Okay, well, yeah, that's basically Index Co-op, Make a DAO. I think Yearn Finance is really good. There's a bunch of others out there. I mean, I don't know all of them off the top of my head. But yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm close to Index Co-op, so I know how that's kind of like run. And I kind of pay close attention to it. So that would be, the one that I would actually look at. So you can just search them on Twitter or whatever, Index Cooperative. And you've probably heard of them by now. But they're the kind of like DAO behind things like the DeFi Pulse Index and the ETH Fly, the Flexible Leverage Index and stuff like that. They're actually making awesome products too. So yeah, I won't shield them too much, but yeah, that's probably the best example of a well-run DAO. But Maker's been, one of the longest DAOs, so that's another really great example, I think. All right, I'm just going to keep moving through kind of the questions here. If you do want to ask a question, just put your hand up. I'll invite you onto the stage, but if not, I'll just keep moving through what I have on my list here. All right, so the next one comes from Silent John, who says, somebody asked in the last AMA, what exactly is an L2? It's often described as a scaling solution for Ethereum, but what does that mean? I've never been able to wrap my head around where my tokens live on L2s. So I guess what we mean by a scaling solution is that it essentially... So I guess maybe I'll take a step back here. The way these L2s work, specifically rollups, so ZK rollups and optimistic rollups, is they essentially compress a bunch of transactions into one transaction and put that on the Ethereum layer 1. So for example, say on layer 2 you have 10,000 transactions that get done. Well then, I'm just using random numbers here just to have a point to kind of like explain this, but you have 10,000 transactions on layer 2 that gets compressed into one proof, so like a proof that those transactions happened and were processed on layer 2, and then that proof gets put onto Ethereum layer 1, and that's just one transaction. So essentially what ends up happening is you compress all the transactions down to one, and you only post to layer 1 the information that's needed to verify that those transactions happened. Because what the L2 does is it splits up the computation of the transaction, so it takes that off-chain onto these kind of like L2s and puts only the data for the transaction on layer 1, so that what you and I can do if we wanted to is we could actually download that data off L1, that one transaction, and then we could replay it on our own local machine if we wanted to make sure that actually processed everything correctly. So we could basically unpack those 10,000 transactions. It's sort of like a zip file or a RAR file on your PC, when you compress like all these files into one kind of zip file, and then you can kind of unpack them, and you run the computation to do that on your PC. That's the same kind of thing that happens with these L2s. So that's what we mean by like a scaling solution here, is that, that's kind of like one way to scale. There are multiple ways to scale, but that's one way. But that's kind of specific to L2s, the rollups and things like that. And then you say, you've never been able to wrap your head around where your tokens actually live. Well, you'll have noticed with a lot of these L2s, if you've used them, such as like Optimism, but even things like sidechains kind of abide by the same principle. You send your tokens to a contract on Ethereum, right? And these are usually called a bridge contract. So what that does is essentially the bridge, once the tokens are sent to the bridge, it sends a signal or a message, I guess, just trying to stay high level here, to the L2 saying, well, this has been deposited from this address, so please credit this kind of like ETH, for example, on the L2 to the same address, and then you can switch your network to the Optimism network, for example, from the Ethereum network, and you'll be able to transact with that ETH that is now locked in the contract on layer 1. So the ETH just lives in that bridge contract. It just sits there until you withdraw it back out. And then, in the case of optimistic rollup, something like Optimism, it will take a week to withdraw that directly from the chain. With ZK rollups, it's a few hours, and sometimes it's much shorter than that depending on the implementation. But yeah, it lives in that contract on layer 1. Now, This is the same for side chains, but the thing with side chains, something like the Polygon POS chain, is that yes, it has a bridge contract, but you have different security guarantees. So the bridge contract that goes from, say, Ethereum to the Polygon POS chain is very different than the bridge that goes from Ethereum to Optimism, because the one that goes to Optimism is, because Optimism is secured by Ethereum's layer 1, you can always get your funds out even if the Optimism network was to go offline, because your funds are on layer 1, you have proof that they are yours, and you can withdraw from that contract. Whereas if you bridge over to Polygon, the POS chain, the only way you can get back to L1 is if the POS chain is still working and still live. And there is a little bit of difference with Polygon because they actually save the state to Ethereum every few hours. But like just to simplify things, if the Polygon POS chain was to go offline, then you wouldn't be able to get your funds back unless that kind of like came back online, because they would be stuck in the bridge. There'd be no way to kind of send those funds back and unlock them on the Ethereum kind of like L1 side. So that's kind of like the security trade-off there. Whereas, you know, with an L2, you can always withdraw your funds no matter what. With a side chain, you know, especially something like that doesn't share, that doesn't even save its state to Ethereum, like Polygon, say like BSC, for example. If BSC was to go offline, then you would lose all your funds that was on there, even though they're in the bridge contract on Ethereum. So hopefully that answers that part of the question there. And then you said, you know, when you tried out Loopring, you sent your tokens to Loopring, and then you could do stuff on there. So yes, you were sending your tokens to a contract, and then it was credited to you on Loopring, but you couldn't see your tokens in MetaMask anymore and had to track via Zapper. And you said you're confused on where your tokens actually are and when I use an L2. I've since sent everything back to my main wallet because I don't really understand it. I mean, this is totally fair, right? But the thing is that I think Loopring treats this a bit differently, where you don't have to change your network. And you know, I won't go into the underlying architecture of how it all works. I wouldn't call myself an expert on that. But in terms of like the other L2s like Optimism and Arbitrum and other things like that, what ends up happening is that you change your network. Like for anyone who's done it, you go to MetaMask, you go change network, and you scroll down, you know, past all Ethereum and the test nets, and you go to the Optimism network, and then you can see your balance in your wallet just like you would normally on the Ethereum mainnet. Whereas with something like Loopring and stuff like that, it works a little differently. But I think I remember when I was playing around with it, you could still see your funds there. So it might have been a token that wasn't supported, or you had to add manually to your MetaMask or something like that. If you want, you can ask me, you can DM me about that if you want some support there. I'm happy to help you with that. But yeah, hopefully that answers your questions around kind of like the L2 and L1s. Because yeah, if it's kind of like a true L2 on Ethereum, then everything should be fine once you change the network. You should be able to track your funds in your MetaMask, or you know, whatever you use essentially, and you should be able to interact with it just like you would a normal Ethereum chain, but obviously with the benefits of the cheaper fees and things like that. All right, the next question here comes from RV Deeb, who says, what are the main points you look at when evaluating other L1 chains? Do you mainly just look at the number of validators to see if it's actually decentralized, and some of the projects to see if there's anything new and exciting, but would be good to know what others you check? So the number one thing I always look for in these other L1 chains is their level of decentralization, because and also, I guess, like the plan. You know, a lot of these chains obviously will start off centralized because they're very new, and if they've always got like a plan to say, okay, we'll decentralize later, blah blah blah, whatever. But what I fundamentally look for is, can this actually decentralize later? And pretty much all of them can't, because what ends up happening, a lot of these L1 chains will launch with saying, you know, oh, we are more scalable than Ethereum. We have X and X amount of transactions per second. You know, come use us because you won't have to deal with high fees. But they'll never tell you the trade-off. And the trade-off that they take is on the spectrum of decentralization and security, where instead of having a robust set of miners and in the future stakers validating the network in a and a robust kind of like node running set where, you know, there's thousands of people running full nodes, they'll typically have, a lot of them use the popular consensus mechanism called distributed proof of stake, where essentially there's just like a handful of nodes that run the network, and it's not real proof of stake like what Ethereum is. People can just like delegate their tokens to these, I guess they're called super nodes, which run the network. Now, this is not very decentralized. If, you know, there's multiple examples of this. EOS was famous for being one of the big ones for doing this, where there was 21 super nodes, essentially. They were all running in data centers, and the chain was like exploding in growth because of the fact that they had like an uncapped amount it wasn't uncapped, but they basically had like an extreme amount of transactions per second that was only able to be achieved because they had these super nodes running the network. Now, if you or I wanted to run a full node of EOS on our kind of like PC, for example, we wouldn't be able to do it because it was so intensive to run that node. So that's like the number one thing I look for, and most of the chains actually run like that. All of the ones that you've heard of before pretty much run like that. So like Solana runs like that, Cardano runs like that. There's even worse ones. Like I remember Neo had like 7 nodes or something like that, and most if not all of them were controlled by Neo themselves. BSC is funny because like I don't know for sure, but like I'm pretty sure that Binance controls all of the nodes. So like that's totally centralized, and also they at the end of the day like they can say, oh, we'll add more nodes in the future or whatever, but there's no path to decentralization because in order to get that decentralization you need to give up the scale. Now when you start giving up scale, well, you're just back to Ethereum essentially, right? If you start decentralizing out, you have to basically make it easier for people to run nodes, which means limiting the network's growth, which means limiting the network scalability. So you're just back to what Ethereum is. And you kind of like slowly rediscover, well, this is why Ethereum is the way it is. Because right now, if you wanted to, if the Ethereum network wanted to, we could raise the block size, which is called the gas limit in Ethereum, to to like 100 million or 200 million or something like that. That would obviously scale the chain massively and we'd have low fees again, but it would mean that the chain becomes unstable because it's very hard for the network to communicate with such large blocks between all the full nodes, like the thousands of full nodes out there and all the different miners, because propagating those big blocks across the network becomes very, very difficult to do for consumer hardware and consumer internet connections. This is why these super nodes run in data centers, because they're kind of purpose built for these sorts of things. So that's kind of like the number one thing I look at. And then in kind of the same spirit as decentralization, I also look at the token distribution, because all of these chains are pretty much starting off as proof of stake these days. And if they're distributed proof of stake, I already kind of like lose interest, because I want to be able to kind of stake my tokens on my own machine, run my own validator like I can with Ethereum. I don't want to have to delegate my tokens to someone else doing, on a super node, and then they're in charge of doing everything for me. I personally don't want to do that. But also, like, what's the distribution like? Was it heavily VC, skewed? Like, did the VCs and insiders and team keep most of the tokens for themselves? Well, if so, well, then what's their incentive to sell? They can just stake forever, right? They can just keep their coins from day one, staking in in one of these chains, and basically have total control over the network, for the foreseeable future. And there's really no real reason for them to sell at the end of the day. Like, they may sell chunks here and there, but a lot of them kind of like just permanently stake and sell off the rewards, for example. Now, some people will argue, well, doesn't this sound similar to Ethereum, where people can stake and then not sell and just stake forever? Yes, that's true to an extent, but the thing is, Ethereum is not DPoS or distributed proof of stake, or I should say delegated proof of stake. It's technically delegated, but everyone can stake on their own if they want to. Yes, the minimum ETH required amount is really high right now. It's 32 ETH, which is like what, 100 grand at today's prices. But ETH had a very, very long distribution period where originally it had a sale which was open to the public. Thousands and thousands of people participated in that sale, but at the same time, you also had a very long proof of work phase and a very long phase where there wasn't proof of stake and there was lots of market cycles. So from 2015, mid 2015, from when Ethereum launched, there was, I think 45 million so far coins issued via proof of work, which were distributed throughout the network. And then there was multiple kind of like boom and bust cycles where people either, bought and sold ETH during that, and then all that ETH kind of like dispersed itself. So many more people had the opportunity to buy ETH much cheaper as well, and a lot of people bought that 32 ETH when it was much less to do so. Like, a lot of people bought it when ETH was $10. It was $320 to buy 32 ETH. A lot of people bought it when it was $100. It was $3,200, which is if you're kind of like living in a first world country, you can spare that. Obviously, that's getting in like the high end of things as well for a lot of people, but still, there's a lot of people who bought up that amount of ETH, and now they're staking and they're kind of like part of the network and all that sort of stuff. And they're not VCs or anything like that. There's no like heavy concentration here in any kind of one actor. So that's another thing I kind of look for in kind of like the decentralization thing. Now, the reason why I'm so heavily focused on that is because without decentralization, I don't think you can attract a good community. I don't think you can attract a community that has like values and that has like a good ethos behind it, that wants to stick around no matter what the kind of the price of the token is doing. Because if you look at Ethereum, a lot of people stuck around no matter what the price was doing, and continue to stick around. And the builders are here because they're on a mission and they really want to build something that's truly decentralized. They don't want to compromise on that. They have like a very they take their values and the core ethos of decentralization very seriously, and they understand the reason why Ethereum's layer 1 is inherently unscalable, because you get the decentralization and security from that. And they also understand that we can scale via layer 2. So let's not make those sacrifices to do that. So any kind of like L1 chain that makes those sacrifices just isn't interesting to a lot of these people. So then you basically don't have a good community. You just have a community full of speculators and people who just really aren't long-term oriented. So you essentially, like, as soon as the bull market subsides, these people just disappear, and then your chain like basically has no activity, no apps or anything on it, and then it kind of like dies off regardless of what the market price is. It just kind of like loses steam and dies off. While, you know, the chains that do have that, such as Ethereum, continue their march on. Development keeps continuing, network effect keeps going, you know, and it keeps getting bigger because of that as well. So those are like the definitely the top things I kind of look at. And I can pretty much, at this point, I can say that I don't think there's ever going to be a layer 1 that launches that is going to pique my interest again. I feel like Ethereum is it. I feel like Ethereum has already won that whole race. I don't think that it has competition for what it is, which is like the global settlement layer, the center of this entire ecosystem. And I just don't see any way that viable competition could come to market. Even if you were to clone Ethereum, and even if you were to say, not clone it, but like copy it and say, okay, well, we're a limited chain, right? You know, not a limited chain, but we're like decentralized because we're not blowing out the scalability, and we have like, say, 20, 30 transactions per second or whatever instead of Ethereum's 15. You know, we're here, and, you know, you can come use us because we have this cool new programming language, or we have this and this and this feature. But people will be like, well, what's the point? Like, the switching costs are insane. Like, switching from Ethereum to this other chain, like, what's the point? Especially if the scalability isn't even there, which is why a lot of people kind of like a lot of L1s market themselves as more scalable, because they know that there's no other things that they can compete on. They can't compete on network effect. They can't compete on liquidity. They can't compete on developers or ecosystem. They can only compete on marketing. And the best way to market, especially to new people, is to promise is to kind of like harp on the weaknesses of Ethereum. And obviously, a lot of people who are new to this ecosystem don't understand that layer 1 is only unscalable because of all the reasons I outlined, not because Ethereum is inherently weak, for example. So I think all of this like is very nuanced, and is something that definitely is not for like the average observer of crypto, people who are just like sitting in here, don't really care to learn about this sort of stuff. They just want to kind of like buy some tokens and that's it. But even for those people, the fact that like Ethereum is talked about all the time, is in like the press all the time, is the biggest kind of network behind Bitcoin, right? Like it's the biggest smart contract network by far. All the activity happens on there, all the DeFi stuff, all the NFT stuff. Even those people, the casual observers, will still say, well, you know, I need to kind of like get involved, or I need to buy ETH because of all this stuff I've heard about it. You know, but they also buy other things, like these casual observers, because they're prone to marketing. And these other competing L1s know this. So that's why they always harp on about scalability. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question about like what I look at when evaluating these L1s, and how it all trickles down really from decentralization. Because if you don't have that, then you can't have anything else. And then it all just comes back to Ethereum in the end anyway. And even the scalable chains, even if, you know, they're scalable and everything like that, it's hilarious because it's just a great irony that pretty much all of them got no traction except BSC, and BSC is just a centralized version of Ethereum. But and the thing is, the reason why it's more scalable is because they just said, well, screw it, like we don't care about decentralization. We're just going to blow out the gas limit. We're going to lower the block times. We don't care if no one can run a full node. We're just going to do this because we know that we can get the activity over, because we're like fully compatible with Ethereum apps. People can just clone their apps on here. And essentially what BSC became was like a bit of a casino during the mania, and a lot of activity was generated there because of that. But there was no lasting activity there. Everyone just came back to Ethereum, especially because Ethereum has L2s going live now and things like that. all the developers stay on Ethereum, all the network effects still stay there. So I just find it like very, very difficult to imagine a world where any L1 even comes close to Ethereum. That's not to say other L1s can't compete in their own niches, and probably they will, because Ethereum won't be able to service like every single use case. Maybe its L2s will be able to one day, but we're still kind of like early days there. But I do think there is a world where these L1s can still gain traction, but nowhere near Ethereum's traction. Like even the market is saying that. Like if you look at like the market cap differences between these things. So I think that those are the kind of like main things I look at. So hopefully that answers your question. A bit of a long-winded answer there, but this is the kind of stuff that I think about a lot, and I really do think it all comes down from decentralization. And if you don't have that, you don't have all the other stuff that you want when kind of evaluating this sort of stuff. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question on the sheet. If in case anyone else has a question, be sure to raise your hand if you do so. All right, so this one comes in from MD888, who says, what action are you taking, not taking based on the current stablecoin quote-unquote crackdown? Thoughts on UST as a safe haven? So I'm not taking any action, really. I don't really take much action when regulation kind of talk comes, because I don't know, like if you kind of look back and look at all the regulation stuff that's happened maybe in the past couple years, it doesn't really affect this space too much. I mean, the biggest effect was, I think, China, banning mining, or like cracking down on mining and then cracking down on exchanges and things like that. But in saying that, I actually don't even think China was the reason the market crashed. I think that BTC was already kind of like showing weakness because it had an amazing run up until that point. And I think ETH was just like at a point where it was just having a crazy run, and it decided, it's too hot. There's so much leverage in the system. It's going to crash. Like, here's a convenient reason for us to crash. So I think the market would have crashed anyway. So even that I wouldn't consider to be something that people should have had to worry about. And in the long run, actually, that's kind of bullish for Bitcoin then, that miners are getting kicked out of China, because it just decentralizes the miners further. But I guess, and look at the regulation recently with this bill that's going through. The market's been pumping, right, in the face of it. There was regulation back in December around the Treasury wanting to ban self-custodial wallets or something like that, or put KYC on them. The market pumped after that, right? ETH was like $600 back then. And if you take a nuanced view at the current regulations happening right now, whether that be related to the stablecoin crackdown or this bill, this infrastructure bill, the infrastructure bill is going to be 2 years before it goes into law. It won't go into law until 2023. Which means that you have 2 years to kind of like fight this in the courts and fight back against it. And there are a lot of vested interests now fighting back against this, whether that be all the centralized exchanges in America or all the kind of like VCs and things like that. These people have lots of money. They have billions and billions of dollars, and they have armies of lawyers ready to kind of like lobby the politicians and fight for this in court. So this wouldn't become law for 2 years. And also the regulations themselves, I mean, as alarmist as people are on Twitter, it's not like they're outright banning crypto with them. Like, even if they were to go in for some reason, it's not like an outright ban on crypto. And the US is only one country too. And I know they have like kind of, I guess, influence over the rest of the kind of world and things like that. But still, like, it's one country. It's not a dictatorship, right? It has to go through an entire political process and then like entire governance process, and there's checks and balances everywhere. So whenever I look at this regulation stuff, I really just, I pay attention to it, but I don't like trade based on it, or I don't position myself in kind of like a defensive position because of it. Because really, I just don't think the broader market, cares too much, really. And the ones that do care and are in the know, they kind of look at the nuance, such as the bill not going kind of like into law until 2023. And they think to themselves, well, if it's not going into law to 2023 and the market's hot right now and the momentum is like a bull market, then why would I sell, sort of thing, right? And these are the kind of players that can potentially move markets, like the bigger players. So that's kind of like how I view it. But in terms of like stablecoin crackdowns, I think this was inevitable. I'd always thought it was a bit weird that the US government was allowing stablecoins to be issued, such as like USDC, and having like basically very little oversight over these things, and also allowing people to do whatever they want with them. Now, regardless of what you think, if it's good or bad, I just was really surprised that this went on for this long, because At the end of the day, this is basically a USD IOU, essentially. Like USDC is an IOU from Circle, and you can do whatever you want with it on the Ethereum network or other kind of networks that you can bridge into and things like that. So I'm surprised it took them this long, but generally with stablecoins, especially ones that are tied to the US dollar, there's just going to be regulations around it all the time, and for the foreseeable future as well. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But this is also why we need decentralized stablecoins. Whether that be something like DAI that's pegged to the dollar as well, that doesn't matter because it is not issued through like an IOU. It is issued as a synthetic dollar with ETH collateral backing it, or you kind of have like something like RAI, which is basically not pegged to a dollar, but it's stable around itself, and it's also backed by ETH. So those are alternatives as well. In terms of like UST as a safe haven, this is the stablecoin on Terra, I believe. I don't think it's been out for long enough, and I don't think any kind of like stablecoin is really a safe haven just yet. I think pretty much all of them have centralized points of failure. So if I was to go into a safe haven and wanted to protect myself from kind of like the governments, I would go into like ETH, for example, right? I wouldn't go into like a stable coin that is tied to the real world. Even DAI is backed by what, 40-50% of USDC, still kind of the same issue there. So in terms of safe haven assets, the only one that I consider to be a true safe haven on Ethereum is ETH. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, MD888. So the next one comes from Reginald Grabs, who says, you may have done this already, but can you do a deeper dive into EIP 3074 and EIP 3675? I did this on the refuel, but for those of you who missed this, I'll do a quick overview here. So what EIP 3074 aims to do is vastly improve the user experience. Now, there is a bunch of stuff that goes into this, a bunch of technical stuff surrounding it. So I'll just kind of like talk about it at a high level. 3074, it basically introduces a mechanism to essentially bundle together the approved transaction and the swap transaction, for example. So if you go to Uniswap today and you want to swap a token that you haven't approved yet, well, you have to approve the token in one transaction, and then you have to swap in another transaction. So you have two transactions, two sets of gas fees, and it's kind of annoying, right? Whereas with 3074, what it allows developers to do is code their contracts up where you can basically bundle these together. So you only have to do one transaction for an approve and a swap, which is awesome, right? It's a huge UX upgrade at layer one. But this isn't the only thing it enables. It enables a bunch of other interesting things that developers can do, bundle these things together and basically, at a really technical level, I believe what it does is it kind of like aims to get rid of the distinction between, I guess, an externally owned account and a smart contract account. I think I'm not sure here because there's actually two account types in Ethereum. One that's a smart contract, that's an account type, and then there's the externally owned account, which is a normal Ethereum address, which is what you and I have. And obviously, externally owned accounts can control smart contracts and interact with them. When you see people say, "Oh, there's a multi-sig that controls this contract," well, that's like an externally owned account, for example. So things like that. So, or like, I guess like multi-sigs can be smart contracts too. It gets a bit confusing there. So that's kind of like the high level of 3074. 3675 is the merge EIP. So this was an EIP that went in a couple of weeks ago, got accepted into the draft stage. This basically describes the process in which the ETH1 chain will be merged into ETH2. Now, for those of you who don't know what the merge is, high level, it's basically getting rid of proof of work from the Ethereum chain and putting in proof of stake. Now, we have a proof of stake chain live today. It's called the Beacon chain. It has been running since December 1st, 2020. It's like 6.7 million ETH staked on there. There's a bridge to get your ETH across on ETH1 and all those sorts of things. The merge is basically just getting rid of proof of work, putting in proof of stake, but the Ethereum chain remains the same. So the chain that we all transact on and know and love today remains exactly the same. The only thing that changes is that consensus mechanism where we will have proof of stake of validating the network and processing transactions instead of proof of work, which is a huge change, obviously, and it's been a change that's been in the works for many years now. People are very excited about it because we get to get rid of like proof of work in mining, which many in the Ethereum community consider to be very, very wasteful and not a very good consensus mechanism. I actually believe Ethereum's proof of stake is much better than proof of work generally, regardless of the environmental concerns. It's just offers better security, better bang for your buck security, because with the merge, we also drop issuance by 90%, right? Which is crazy because at the moment, issuance is about 4.5% on the ETH1 chain, Once you get rid of proof of work and implement proof of stake only, the issuance will be around 0.5%. And it goes up depending on how much ETH is staked. But even if there's like 30 million ETH staked or something like that, the issuance is only 1%. And we're currently burning more ETH than with 1559 than we're issuing on the proof of stake chain. So ETH would still be net deflationary, which is quite cool as well. So that's another reason why people are really excited about the merge is basically getting off the proof of work issuance, stop overpaying for security, and get better bang for our buck here. So yeah, hopefully that answers kind of like your questions about those two EIPs. Obviously, people can Google those if they want additional answers here. All right, so one here from Andreas who says, will there be intrinsic value, an intrinsic value difference between NFTs on layer 1 Ethereum versus layer 2s, whether for status eventually or gas-related reasons or other reasons? Both collections, for example, Punk's Bored Ape Yacht Club versus future L2 projects, and more traditional art such as Lulu, XXX, Ferocious on layer 1 versus future artists on layer 2, or framed differently, will in the future deciding whether to mint on L1 versus L2 play a role in value? I think their answer is no to most NFTs, but I think that NFTs draw their value from a lot of different things, and I would say that where they're issued on is besides like it being Ethereum versus another chain, if you're making this distinction between L1 and L2, I don't think that's going to play a big kind of like part in the valuing of these things. For example, if you're looking at CryptoPunks and why they're valued, there's a million different reasons, and I haven't heard anyone talk about them saying, "Oh, well, it's because it's on layer 1 Ethereum and it's not on layer 2." And those, some of those reasons for Punks is basically, well, it's widely considered the first original kind of like semi-popular NFT on Ethereum. It has a lot of lore and history behind it. They were given out for free. Now they're worth millions of dollars. There's only 10,000 of them. A lot of them are lost because a lot of people forgot about them. They basically have identifiable features which people kind of like put as their profile picture. They're a status symbol. They're for flexing, right? There's all those kind of things there. They're infinitely kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You can basically do different things with them, like issue different NFTs against them. You can put them in like metaverse games and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons why something like Punks are valuable. And I just don't think there's going to be much of a distinction between L1 and L2. Where the distinction does lie, though, is NFTs issued on Ethereum versus NFTs issued on another network. Because I think that when they're issued on Ethereum, people understand, Ethereum is the cultural hub of this ecosystem. It is where NFTs were born and bred. It's where they live. It's where the kind of like cultural center comes together, and essentially like where the permanence is too, where you can swap these things freely and openly. No one can control what you do with them. Everyone's open to build on these sorts of things. You can buy and sell them on OpenSea and all that sort of stuff. So I think that plays a much larger role than L1 versus L2 in terms of like value for these things. But in saying that, I personally think CryptoPunks is always going to be the most valuable NFT on Ethereum, and they obviously were issued on layer 1, and maybe people will end up coveting that in the future for some reason, but it remains to be seen. I think that I personally don't think that's going to be a big distinction because you can bring these NFTs back to layer 1 from layer 2 anyway, so does it really matter where they were minted, I guess? Does it really matter? I mean, you can use a real-life analogy here. Does it really matter that the CEO of a billion-dollar company came from another country and not the country that the company was founded in? I mean, no, not really, right? Like, is their value determined by their kind of like location? Not necessarily. So is the NFTs valued based on kind of like their location on Ethereum? I don't think so. But yeah, as I said, it does get a little bit kind of different when you look at other chains versus Ethereum because of those different kind of properties there. So maybe my analogy isn't the best thing in the world, but just something I came up with then. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Andreas. All right, I'm just going to have a quick drink and then I'll keep going through the questions. All right, one here from Reginald Grabs again, who says, can we do a deep dive in setting up a validator node? Not on the AMA, because that'll take me a while, but essentially there are a bunch of guides out there right now for setting up an ETH2 validator. Bankless has a couple. You can just Google for them, ETH2 validator Bankless. That'll come up with a few links for you. But it's very straightforward, actually. And there's a bunch of videos, too, from different people as well on YouTube, if you just search for that on YouTube, too. But it's not too difficult to set up your own validator on your machine. I mean, a lot of you who watch the refuel will see that there's a PC next to me. If you look at my kind of like camera there, that is my staking box. It is like a pretty modest box. It's not anything too kind of like complicated or expensive. And I just kind of like installed, I mean, I'm running Windows, and then I kind of like installed my validator and everything like that and followed the instructions, and it was very straightforward to set up. But if you need to, but that's because like I have a background in computers as well, in technology. So it was a bit more kind of like second nature to me. But if you want like a totally noob-friendly guide, Bankless has a couple that you can Google for. So just search ETH2 Validator Bankless, and you'll be able to find those articles on there. All right, well, a question here. There's a few questions here actually from Yawn the Fawn. So the first question is, how do bridges from L1s to L2s or L2s to other L2 sidechains work under the hood? When I take, say, one Ether that is displayed in my MetaMask account balance, connected to the Ethereum network, and then bridge it to Optimism, what exactly is happening? I explained this earlier when I was answering a different question, but I guess like the TLDR people who just joined is when you send those funds to the bridge contract that lives on Ethereum, they are essentially locked in there until you choose to withdraw them again. Now, you can withdraw them at any time you want. You basically just submit a withdrawal transaction, or which basically hits a function on the smart contract, which releases them from the contract depending on the rules. So with Optimism, it would be a 7-day withdrawal period. With different zero knowledge proofs, it can be anywhere from like a couple minutes to a few hours. And then with sidechains, it can be a few hours, like with the Polygon POS sidechain. But if you go through their Matic Plasma bridge, it can be a week. So there's like different kind of times there, but that's essentially kind of how it works and how the bridging kind of works under the hood there. And then you ask, does my Ethereum network ETH get locked up in the contract? Yes. And then only to be released later when you bridge it over? Yes. And how is the Ethereum network able to communicate with the Optimism network such that an equivalent amount of ETH is then minted on Optimism? So I think I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to attempt to answer this anyway. I'm pretty sure what ends up happening is that the Optimism network looks at the contract itself and kind of looks at the state root of the contract and what's happened there, and then kind of like issues it on the Optimism network. But I might be butchering that explanation because the technical details definitely elude me, the deep technical details on this. So it's probably worth kind of maybe doing a bit of a Google search for that. But essentially, yeah, the way it's done is in a very decentralized and trustless way. I just don't know the kind of like, I guess, raw details, because that's definitely getting in the technical side of things, and I haven't looked into that kind of side of it just yet. So hopefully that answers those questions for you. Your second question here from You on the Fawn says, in the past few months, Axie Infinity has exploded in terms of revenue, dwarfing almost every protocol and DeFi project. The only project earning more revenue in the Ethereum is the Ethereum protocol, but Axie looks poised to overtake Ethereum very soon. First, could you define revenue in the context of a DeFi project, a protocol, and a game? And second, could you explain how a single game, with which most normies have no idea exists, is on track to generate more revenue than the revenue generated from the entirety of the financial activity on the Ethereum network? Okay, so I think I should answer your first question first. Where you say, could you define revenue in the context of a DeFi project, a protocol, and a game? So in the context of a DeFi project, there are two different revenue streams here. There is the supply side and the demand side. Now, what I mean by this is essentially not the demand side, the protocol side. So the supply side in, for example, Uniswap is the liquidity providers. So the revenue generated by the liquidity providers goes directly to them. It does not go to the protocol. And then the protocol revenue is basically all the revenue that doesn't go to the liquidity providers and goes to the protocol. So maybe SushiSwap is a better example here, where the 0.25% of the fee on each transaction goes to the liquidity providers and 0.05% goes to the protocol. So that's kind of like how DeFi project revenues are normally kind of, I guess, are determined there. And then you say a protocol like a layer 1 protocol. For Ethereum, the revenue really is just like the gas fees. You could technically argue that MEV is also revenue for like the stakers or the miners, right? So that factors into it as well. So I would say gas fees and MEV equal the total amount of revenue that Ethereum miners and stakers are kind of generating, but also you have to kind of like take out the fees that are being burned. Right now with 1559 in place, essentially the revenue that the miners and stakers are generating is the tip revenue that they get. So not the base fee, which is burned, but the tip revenue, and then all the MEV revenue on top of that. So, and the Ethereum protocol itself is generating revenue based on the amount of fees that are being burned. So if there's like $10 million of fees being burned out of a total of $15 million of fees each day, that $5 million goes to miners and stakers, that $10 million basically goes to ETH holders, right? Because the ETH is being burned, which adds deflationary pressure to ETH, which, obviously over time it should lead to an increase in the ETH price. So that's kind of like how that works there. And then you said a game here. Now, let's use Axie Infinity as an example. Axie has many different ways to generate revenue in their game. The top ways that they're doing it today is marketplace fees. So every time a buy or sell happens on their marketplace, that fee goes to the protocol or goes to like a treasury or something like that. And breeding fees. So in Axie, what you do is you breed different Axies together to create like new ones and things like that. Those also go there. And I think there was one other lever that they had for generating fees that is currently in place. But that basically goes to the treasury or like the protocol that the kind of like DAO, in the future, if they have a DAO, things like that, can kind of vote on there. And then they can implement anything basically to do this, right? They can implement kind of like premium features for users and stuff like that. That could go to the DAO. They could introduce things like basically buying exclusive items from the team if they want to issue things like that from like the core team or from the DAO to raise money and stuff or whatever. They could sell tokens from the treasury and raise money like that. There's various different things you can do as like value added services or kind of like premium features or whatever you want to call it. Whereas with something like a DeFi project, they can also do this, right? They have other levers they can pull. They have other kind of like things that they can tap into to generate additional revenue. But when it comes to a protocol such as Ethereum, really, I mean, Ethereum is going to pretty much locked into just the fees that are being paid as the main revenue kind of like driver there, and MEV being a complement to that as well. But over time, we want MEV to be as minimized as possible, so that revenue will probably go down. So really, it would be the fee revenue at the end of the day for Ethereum. And as I said, you have to split that out into burnt fees and fees paid to miners via the tip or stakers in the future and things like that. And then hopefully that covers that kind of the first stuff there. And then secondly, you asked, like, can I explain how a single game like Axie can generate more revenue than the Ethereum network? Well, I think, if you take the nuanced view and see that the Axie Infinity protocol has multiple different ways to generate revenue for itself, whereas like Ethereum the Axie Infinity game, whereas Ethereum as a protocol has one main way, and it's not really trying to optimize generating revenue for itself or for the miners and stakers. It's optimizing for just being this kind of like base layer that sends all or enough of that, or as much as that value as it can, to ETH as an asset. But then ETH as an asset is also reinforced by all the value being generated on top, right? Because it's used in DeFi, it's used in the NFT market, it's used for staking, all that sort of stuff as well. So it's a pretty big difference. And I would also say you need to look at the long-term kind of growth and sustainability of the revenue. Now, Axie Infinity has gone through a mania lately, right? Like the last couple months has definitely been a mania for that game. Now, is this sustainable? Is this going to be something that we see play out over the next year, for example? Are they going to be generating this revenue constantly or growing for the next year? And you say, well, most normies don't even know it exists yet, but it's already generating all this money. Well, we've seen that this can happen during crypto manias, where there's a lot of money in this ecosystem already, and a lot of the money, this money gets sloshed around. And when you have a good feedback loop like what Axie Infinity does, where the token is heavily tied to the game, and also the game mechanics also encourage, I guess, like the more money that comes in, the more Axies are bought, the more Axies are bred, right? And then it just kind of like has this feedback loop going. You generate kind of like this enormous revenue in a short period of time. But I would wager that this isn't going to be sustainable, because for it to be sustainable, you need fresh money coming in all the time, right? And you can argue that this is true for Ethereum as well, and it is, right, for the gas fees and stuff like that. You need people to be willing to spend money on the gas fees to do things on the Ethereum network. But Ethereum is very generalized, where it's not just one thing, it's everything on Ethereum. Whereas Axie is relying on one thing, and that's the game itself. Ethereum, and the funny thing is that Axie also drives value to Ethereum, because the Ronin bridge, and all the kind of like Axie stuff that happens on Ethereum in the NFT ecosystem also ends up burning ETH now, because all that activity is generating gas fees, which most of them being burnt and things like that. So that's just one thing on Ethereum, right? Then you have everything else. You have all of DeFi, you have all the other NFT stuff, you have the DAO stuff, you have just people doing like commerce on chain, like with stablecoins or ETH. Just anything that you can think of on Ethereum is being done. That's why it makes it sustainable, because what ends up happening is that if one area of Ethereum is quiet, right? If one sector is quiet and another one is hot, well, that kind of balances itself out. And you've seen that actually play out, where I think DeFi was quiet for a little while the last 2 to 3 months because the market calmed down, but then the NFT, like the wider market, then the NFT market kind of went into a mania, and then the NFT activity on Ethereum picked up the slack for the DeFi kind of market, which means that there was more sustainable gas fees and more sustainable revenue for Ethereum. So that's kind of like how I make the distinction there. And I always look at the long term. Like short term, you're always going to see these spikes in things, especially during mania phases, manias always pop. Like in every single mania I've ever seen in any kind of market, it always pops and it will come back down to earth. And then, if it has actual longevity and sustainability, it'll continue growing over time. It might go into other manias along the lines, but it's not going to along the line, but it's not going to sustain that forever. So hopefully that kind of like answers those questions there. I think that's a really good question, but I think making the distinction here and just looking and seeing in the next year how the revenue of Axie Infinity compares to what it was during its last couple months is going to be very telling to see how kind of like it was a mania and that that was good. They generated a lot of money, but it wasn't very sustainable at the time. Whereas with Ethereum, really over the last year and a bit, the gas prices have remained, or at least the fees on Ethereum have remained quite high, and the revenues remain quite high. Even in the really quiet periods, like June and July was quite quiet, where the gas fees actually got down to sub 10 Gwei. Now they're back up to like 30 or 40 Gwei or something like that, because the market's heating up, but also there's just so many use cases on Ethereum using so much gas, and obviously with 1559 now, that gas is being burned, so it's even kind of like better for Ethereum as an ecosystem and for the ETH token as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. All right, I think you had one last question here. From Yon the Fawn again, who says, topic, rollups. Is the following statement accurate? And if not, could you point out its inaccuracies? A rollup layer 2 will take a group of transactions and process them in an L2 environment, resulting in a new state. They will then submit the following information to the L1. A snapshot of the previous state, the group of transactions the L2 would like to batch as one L1 transaction, a compressed snapshot of the new state, resulting from the L2 having simulated processing this group of transactions, a proof which proves that L2 acted legitimately in its processing of the transactions and reaching the new proposed state. Yes, this is completely accurate, I believe. This is basically describing the act of putting both the data of the activity on the L2 on L1, and it's also describing the act of putting the proof on L1 as well, so that you can prove that computation was ran at L2, and you can have the data on L1 so that anyone else can run that computation and compare the proof to make sure that it was done correctly. And then you have a couple of follow-up questions here. You say, typically a single transaction on Etherscan is just one line item, aka, Bob transfers one ETH to Alice. When the L1 accepts a rollup from an L2, does a single transaction in Etherscan instead have multiple line items? Bob transfers one ETH to Alice, Ryan transfers 3 ETH to David, Jane swaps 2,000 DAI for 1 ETH on Uniswap. No. This goes back to what I was saying, or what you kind of like said in your list here, but also what I was saying before about how the things that end up on L1 from L2s are compressed. So if you want to unpack those transactions and you want to see the different line items, you have to run that locally yourself, process it on your kind of like computer or whatever, and then you'll be able to unpack it, just like you would be able to unpack a zip file, right? When you kind of like extract the zip file, then you see everything that's in there. That's the same thing with rollups. I think that's a pretty good analogy of kind of like of listening to that. Of reading that. And then your second question here, given that the current state on L1 is changing with every blocked mined, so every 15 seconds, wouldn't an L2 rollup submission be at risk of getting stale, as it needs to submit a valid snapshot of the current L1 state as part of its request to publish a batch? So with ZK rollups, they have to do that. They kind of like publish pretty much like every Ethereum block, I believe, to kind of like keep their state fresh on there. But with optimistic rollups, it works differently. And this is the trade-off in security models, where optimistic rollups basically take what's called the optimistic approach, where they assume everything happening on their L2 is correct, and if anyone wants to challenge that, they can submit their own kind of like state proof to challenge that, and then there's kind of like this 1 week period where there's an arbitration process that happens. Whereas essentially, well, say you say, okay, well, I detected fraud here. I have a proof that fraud existed. I'm submitting this proof. Now people have to kind of review that, do the arbitration process for a week, and if it turns out that fraud kind of like proof basically says, well, yes, there was fraud that occurred on here, then the chain corrects itself and it continues on from there. But the chain is continuing on during this arbitration process as well. Whereas if it comes back and the fraud proof was incorrect and it didn't actually happen like that, then the person who put up the fraud proof loses their bond, because you have to put up a bond to do this, and that costs them money because the bond is, I think, usually in ETH or something like that. So yeah, those are the two distinctions between like rollups and ZK rollups and optimistic rollups. Is that ZK rollups, publish it because a state can go stale there, whereas optimistic rollups optimistically assume that everything is going okay, and they only check their work, so to speak, when someone submits like a fraud proof or something like that. Otherwise, they just like assume everything's running correctly. So Paradigm has a couple of pieces breaking this down further. If you want to go read those, they're very good at breaking this down. So if you just go to Paradigm's research blog and Deribit's research blog as well, they both have really great pieces covering how rollups versus ZK rollups versus optimistic rollups works, and how they deal with this kind of like this kind of thing that I just described. All right, your third question here is how is it that L1 knows how to handle the idea of a proof from a foreign system, the L2? Is this something that had to be built into L1 to facilitate? No. So what on the technical level, what L2 does is it basically submits that proof to L1, of course, but it uses something called call data, which essentially allows it to put the correct data that it needs to onto L1 in order to put a layer two proof on there. And this is just because I think call data has been in the Ethereum virtual machine, or at least the Ethereum kind of system, for quite a while now. So yeah, it was already there, but I think in the future there are different, like, they're called opcodes that L2 researchers would like to get into the Ethereum layer 1. But as far as I know, none of them have gone in just yet, or maybe some of them have. I mean, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the different EIPs and stuff like that, but essentially, the foreign system can do this because the functionality is already there on L1, and it's called call data. It's basically an opcode that can be taken advantage of on Ethereum to store these sorts of L2 proofs on there. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, on to the next question from Monkey King, who says, how many ETH do you think you need to live comfortably for the rest of your life? Asking as someone approaching 30. I think this totally depends on your personal situation, right? Like, if you're living in a place where the cost of living is really low, then you're going to need a lot less ETH than someone who is living in somewhere like Australia or the US where the cost of living is really high, for example. Oh, I mean, there's different parts of the US, but I guess like major cities. Like if you're living in San Francisco, right, for example, versus living in another city in the world that's like very, very cheap to live in, well, your needs are going to be much less. So I don't think there's one answer, one size fits all answer for this sort of thing here. I think that you have to kind of work out your cost of living, work out and project that out. Like if you're 30, you want to project that out. It's hard. Project it out 50 years, right? Like assuming you live to 80, and you want to live comfortably. Well, as I said, you can live like a king in somewhere like Bali, for example, or you can live on very little money, or you can live, not very modestly in something like San Francisco. You just have to kind of work out that for yourself. And I don't think that maybe it's kind of hard as well because ETH is volatile as well. So I think living off ETH comfortably, and if you want to live off ETH comfortably, you'd have to be putting it to work. So you'd probably be staking, for example, and the staking returns are 6% a year denominated in ETH. So you would have to have a lot of ETH to kind of make that worth your while in order to replace a full-time salary and things like that. You'd probably have to have, if your full-time salary in the US is what? I don't know what the average salary is in the US. In Australia, it's 80,000 Australian dollars. So to generate that, you would have to have 600,000-700,000, maybe more than that. Actually, more than that, I think. You'd have to have $1 million AUD worth of ETH staking. That assumes the ETH price is the same. Probably even more than that, to generate kind of that to kind of make up for the loss in salary if you just kind of wanted to chill on your own sort of thing. So yeah, but if you like invest in ETH and then cash out a big chunk or something like that, then it's very different depending on where you live. Like you could cash out like $1 million if you got into ETH at the right time and you cashed out at the right time, and then as I said, you can go live like a king in somewhere like Bali where the cost of living is really, really low, or $1 million isn't going to get you very far in San Francisco, for example. So there's obviously other parts in the world you can live in and things like that. But I think that is going to heavily, heavily determine what is actually life-changing money or enough money to live comfortably. Yeah, so I can't really give a one-size-fits-all answer for that. All right, another question here from Yon the Fawn, who says, topic, CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. There was a statistic this year saying something like 80 countries are exploring CBDCs, but currently we live in a world where fiat dollars are already digital. Most of our day-to-day transactions involve digitally receiving, sending fiat from our bank account, as well as apps such as Venmo, PayPal, etc. Given that fiat is already digital, what does it mean when a country like the US says they're exploring the option of a US digital currency? Isn't our currency already digital? So you can take two approaches to this. You can take the very pessimistic approach and say that these kind of like countries realize that with a CBDC they could have much greater control over the currency, and aka much greater control over the population and much greater surveillance over it, because as we all know, blockchains are totally transparent. And you can build backdoors into stablecoins if you want to, where you have centralized admin keys and things like that. So a CBDC would essentially give, I guess, like the government, if they wanted it, total, I guess, like transparency over the financial system. I mean, they already have a lot of transparency, but like total transparency over the financial system, where basically cash is outlawed. You have like these natively digital currency, and you know they can take the money away from you whenever they wanted to. For example, if you did something wrong. I mean, there's instances of this happening in China where essentially they have like the social credit score system and things like that, where they can freeze your accounts at any kind of like time if they want to, or take your money, and without cash, like you don't really have much recourse there if it's with a CBDC. But I think that's like the pessimistic approach, and obviously that's the approach that most people will take, especially the surveillance aspect to it. And you said that the dollars are already digital. Well, I actually don't think fiat is like a digital currency. Fiat, I mean, runs on the digital fiat still runs on all the old rails. They're slow, they're clunky, things go missing, the bookkeeping's ridiculous. Like it's just a band-aid upon band-aid system. Whereas with a CBDC, if you utilize the technology that we have now, like blockchains and like truly digital kind of currencies, then you get like a lot more features out of it too, and a lot more, I guess, like good and bad features, I should put it that way. But if you want to take the optimistic approach, it's maybe just like these countries being like, okay, well, we need to bring finance into the digital age, and we need to be at the forefront of this, because I think they do know about DeFi, and they're starting to realize how transformative DeFi can be, and starting to kind of get their head around it. And governments will always kind of like take this approach as like okay, well, we need to have control here, we need to have I guess like some kind of guardrails here. We need to make sure that people are using kind of like our currencies and not foreign currencies or whatever. And we need to kind of like, I guess, bring our systems into the 21st century, into the digital age, to increase our economic output and things like that. So I think those are some of the reasons there. But generally, you'll see that a lot of these may not eventuate. It may not actually result in anything concrete for a long time. Which means that the system that we're building within crypto, within DeFi and stuff like that, will end up just taking over from sheer network effect, which I believe it will. And how many people are actually going to opt into CBDCs if they can use something else and have an alternative here? Maybe they will because of convenience, and maybe the governments will actually roll this out faster than I think. And maybe I'm giving like most people too much credit. Maybe they will just say, okay, well, this is easier. I don't care if I'm being tracked, whatever. I'm just going to use this. So there's a lot to think about here, a lot to unpack. But hopefully that answers the bulk of your question there, and kind of like gives you some insight into maybe why these countries are exploring CBDCs. All right, next question here comes from Patrick, who says, this is a long one here. There's a bunch of stuff in here, but I think this is a good one. I'm not convinced that Ethereum, including sharding, layer 2 solutions, and so on, will be able to handle the need for scale. I see so many challenges. For example, sharding will bring us specialized shards, but what is it good for if we have one perpetual shard, one trade shard, one NFT shard, and so on, and the composability between them is not the way we need it. All right, so I'll read through the rest of this, but I will focus on this part first. So The way sharding is, the roadmap for sharding right now with Ethereum is that it won't actually work like this, where there's one shard for each kind of, I guess, a use case. It's actually going to be, the shards will be data availability layers for layer 2s, which means that the shards themselves won't be processing transactions. They'll be basically acting as data layers for L2s to store their data on and their proofs on, and all the computation and everything gets done at the L2, and instead of, I guess, like on the shards. So the shards won't have an EVM or like an Ethereum virtual machine or a way to process these sorts of things. So there won't be this kind of like, I guess, difference in use cases for the different shards. At least that's the kind of current roadmap and how things are going there. And then you say, composability breaks. Well, it breaks whether it's sharding or layer 2s, but as we've been seeing lately, there's a lot of solutions coming out for this. A lot of them being the bridges, right? There's a hot protocol, there's Connext, there's Salar Network. There's plenty of these things coming out now that bridges this liquidity. Starkware's working on their DAM or the DAMM, which allows people to tap into layer 1 liquidity from layer 2. There's so much of this stuff going on. So I, again, don't think that's going to be an issue going forward with composability. So moving on to your next stuff, there will be huge costs because of this, especially for handling all the bridging. I mean, the cost really is like, I don't know how you would describe it, right? There's obviously like the layer 1 cost, the gas fees and things like that, but the bridge operators are going to cover those costs because they're going to be taking a fee, right? They're going to be taking like a cut whenever someone uses the bridge, and that fee will go into, I guess, like paying for gas fees if they need to, and then taking a profit from that as well. But it does remain to be seen how that's going to shake out for sure. And then you say, I see so many thought leaders, including you being me, keep talking almost blindly optimistic about solving those challenges. Well, I wouldn't say I'm talking about it blindly. I would say that I have researched all the available solutions today. I have looked at the empirical evidence of the past and like how I've been scaling. I've looked at the fact that all of these scaling solutions do actually work today. The bridges do work. The L2s do work. You can go use them right now. Yes, they may be slower to roll out than we would like, but they do work. And that's why I'm so optimistic about it. And I guess just a general note there, I'm so optimistic as well, is because like within Ethereum, the Ethereum ecosystem for as long as I've been in it, since early 2017, has hit so many roadblocks, like roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, and has gone through all of them. Like and has gone through all of them relatively quickly as well, if you really look at things, and has gotten stronger because of it, and has attracted more and more smart people to the ecosystem because of it. So that's where my optimism comes from the fact that I've been in this ecosystem for so long, and I've seen it like all play out basically, and I've done the research. So yeah, so hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into why I'm so optimistic here. But like, I get it, right? If you're newer to the ecosystem, or maybe if you kind of like think deeply about this stuff and you don't have maybe additional context or anything around this, you may think that these things can seem unsolvable, but I don't think so. I truly think that we're going to solve all of these challenges, and we're going to do it in a way that doesn't actually bring like complications for users. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some more color there. And then you say, this optimism is often along the lines of, quote, if you combine Ethereum 2.0, sharding and layer 2 solutions, we will be able to scale. There will be bridges all over the place. Liquidity and composability will be no problem. It will be fluid and a healthy ecosystem. This is like, I guess you watch the refuel a lot. That is like almost verbatim what I say on the refuel. So that's quite funny. But I mean, I truly believe that. I don't just say that just to like pump my bags. I like truly believe that. That's like my view on how it's all going to work. But you're right. You're fine to be skeptical about it for sure. But then you go on to say, so your question is, let's say we have sharding, more layer 2 solutions, more bridges in 2 to 3 years. What could actually be possible? Please try to answer this question in a non-hype way, and don't try to sell me on everything will be great. I'm already listening and I'm bullish. I would like to learn more about the real possibilities over the next 2 to 3 years. And I should note here, Patrick did say this was going to be a challenging question, but I like these challenging questions. So what would actually be possible? I guess you can maybe talk about this in terms of transactions per second if you want to, as something measurable. So I think that what could actually be possible with these L2s when they reach maturity and with sharding in place is 1 million plus transactions per second across like everything. Now, of course, this probably isn't going to be enough. If you think about, like, a lot of people like to do the Visa comparison where they say, okay, well, there's 40,000 transactions per second on the Visa network, and that's just one network. Ethereum plans to do everything, right? Ethereum wants to do financial activity. It wants to be the centerpiece for culture, like NFTs. It wants to do Web3 stuff. It wants to do DAO stuff. Like, how can we possibly get to the scale required to do that? Well, in 2 to 3 years, we probably won't be at the scale to do that. We will probably only be at the scale to do, I think, like maybe DeFi NFT stuff. I don't think we'll be at the scale to do Web3 stuff in a major mass adoption way. So you're right for that. But like longer term, I do believe that we will be. I do believe that the layer 2 ecosystem will keep scaling via various different means. There's kind of like different things we can do with L2. There's different scalability gains we can get there. There's different L2 constructions. Like there's something like ZK Porter, which is taking some security and decentralization trade-offs, but it allows us to do 100,000 transactions per second at L2 without sharding. And with sharding, I mean, you multiply that by like 64 times, right? You get over 6 million transactions per second, and that's only with 64 shards. If we have more shards, you get more from there. So that's kind of like, I'm trying not to be hypey about this, but like that's just my general tone anyway. I'm hypey about everything. But that's what I can kind of see being possible there. Now, I want to say also that I don't think that that there isn't a world for side chains, and there isn't a world for these things that take basically massive security trade-offs but just bridge into Ethereum. I think there definitely is a world for that. Not everything needs Ethereum level security, right? I think DeFi definitely does, like 100% think DeFi does. I think a lot of NFT activity, especially the high value stuff, does, but a lot of stuff doesn't. A lot of stuff doesn't need, I guess like if you look at Ethereum level security, it's basically an army protecting you. You have like an entire army around you with complex machinery. Like if you're just doing an analogy to an army, complex devices detecting everything. Like, it's kind of like Ethereum is like the US Army, and a side chain is like a couple of personal bodyguards, for example. So not everyone needs the US Army protecting them all the time in everything that they do. Obviously, when you're being attacked, when your country's being attacked, you want the army to protect you, because your most high value kind of like asset is your, I guess, like safety and your freedom within your country. Whereas you don't need kind of like that level of security for your everyday stuff, in everyday kind of like things that you do. You have like the police for the smaller stuff, and then if you're really paranoid, you can obviously hire a personal bodyguard and stuff like that. So I mean, hopefully that's an analogy that kind of like resonates with people there. But that's kind of like how I think about it. So there's definitely going to be side chains, and they could be called app chains or whatever. There's definitely going to be like L2s that scale really well. But in 2 to 3 years, I don't expect everything to be like super, clean and fluid, and everyone's kind of like adopting Ethereum and everything's going great. I do think it's going to take longer than that. I think scaling Ethereum is a pretty long marathon to get to the point where we can achieve worldwide scale. I would say it's probably still going to take 5 to 10 years from here, but I think that we can scale a lot of DeFi relatively quickly within the next 2 to 3 years, and I think NFTs can also be scaled in that kind of vein as well, especially because I expect sharding to be delivered in that time frame, and I expect L2s to be fully rolled out by then and improved upon and approaching their maturity, like the 100% maturity state, but approaching some level of maturity within that time as well. So yeah, thank you for the complicated questions, Patrick. So hopefully that answers that for you there. I'm going to keep moving through the list now. So one here from Knowledge Fight, who says, how do you manage debt in crypto? I think it is ingrained in most of our normie head that debt is bad. Could you shed some light on some strategies you took, especially when the bear market hit in the last cycle? So the last cycle, I'm going to assume you mean like 2018, 2019, I didn't have any debt. Maker had just came out, like it came out in December of 2017. Hardly anyone was using it. I definitely wasn't using it. I was still pretty noob back then. In 2017, I focused mostly on the price because it was just easy to focus on the price. But then like in 2018 was when I really started learning about everything in depth. But generally, I didn't have any debt back then within crypto. So I didn't have to manage anything. And how I guess like what's orthogonal to that is managing the drawdown, because ETH obviously went down 94% from January 2018 to December 2018. The way I managed that is I held. I didn't sell a single ETH in that year. I still haven't sold a single ETH, but I didn't sell anything. I held all the way down. Now, it became easy for me to hold because I bought pretty much all of my ETH under $100, so it was fine. But I held, and I just kept learning. I kept keeping up with the ecosystem. I grew my presence within the ecosystem. I kept doing research. I stopped looking at the charts and things like that. I stopped caring about the market, and I was talking to people every day. I was getting to know people, networking, and there wasn't many of us back then. It was a really, really tight-knit community, honestly. Like, I started ETH Hub with Eric Connor in late 2018, and there was a bunch of us just like seriously just diving into the tech and staying the course with it. So I guess like that's how That was my strategy during the bear market. But in terms of like managing debt generally within crypto, whenever I take debt against my ETH or take out like stablecoins against my ETH, I make sure my liquidation price is really low. And I also make sure that I have the money available to cover that in case for some reason the ETH price was to dump to my liquidation price, or if I needed to pay back that debt really quickly. And by doing that, essentially what happens is I put my stablecoins into like a yield farm, for example, right? And then if the price is crashing and I need to get out of that yield farm, I can quickly pay the debt back. So I don't go and essentially buy more ETH with that debt and like leverage trade or whatever. I don't do any of that. But if you were to do that, there's different ways to manage those positions, but that's up to the individual. But when I say really low liquidation price, I'm pretty sure I have a little bit of debt right now, but I took debt out for other reasons. I'm not yield farming with it right now. But I have a little bit of debt, and my liquidation price is under $500. So, what are the chances of ETH going to under $500? I mean, basically 0% from here. I mean, it can go to under $500 over a long period of time, but I doubt that it would be able to go to that in like, a day, for example, right? Before I would be able to pay back the debt. So that's kind of like how I manage. Just don't take on too much debt, and make sure you can pay it back if something does go sour and if the market does go south. And generally, I mean, this isn't financial advice. This is just like life advice, I think. Just maybe stay away from leverage trading, because this is how I've seen most people blow themselves up that I know and lose a lot of their money. They leverage trade. And the easiest way to kind of like, I guess, poison crypto for yourself is losing it all by trying to leverage trade. So I guess like that would be my little bit of advice, because and leverage trading obviously has a lot to do with debt. So that's why I kind of like talk about that. But that is definitely something you should keep in mind and keep on top of for sure. All right, question here from Tuna, who says, hey, Anthony, you must have been tired from all those ETH killer questions, but I specifically wanted to ask this because I think Avalanche is currently the only viable option. You responded to their burning fee tweet early on, but I want to ask you, what do you think about its consensus mechanism supposedly being better than Casper's? Do you have detailed info on the topic? Thanks in advance. I don't have detailed info on the topic. I haven't looked into it too broadly, Avalanche itself. I do know it's a novel mechanism that hasn't been done before. I do know that they don't have slashing, which I thought was very weird. But I don't have like specialized knowledge of it. I haven't had a chance to look into it yet. So I can't really, answer that question too much there. But I would say that, Avalanche is, I mean, regardless of what consensus mechanism they use, they are just an L1 in a sea of L1s. And I mean, I responded to their fee burn tweet. For context here, actually, no, I responded to the Peter from Geth quote tweeting Avalanche saying basically, oh, we've been burning ETH from like, the start of our launch or whatever. And then Peter was saying, well, we've burned more ETH in the first few hours than you guys have burned since you launched the network. And then I responded saying that Optimism has actually generated more fees over the last 24 hours than Avalanche has. And Optimism has only been around for like a few weeks, right? So I was being a bit snarky there, of course, but yeah, that's kind of like the way I view just Avalanche and ETH killers in general. They're really just fighting for scraps, and before they can even have a shot at kind of like coming at Ethereum. But in terms of consensus mechanisms, I really don't think that's a differentiating feature. I don't think that that's something that's going to, flip the tide there and basically flip the advantage to one of these Ethereum killers at the end of the day. I really do think that that's a nuanced thing that most people don't really care about, and it's not something that people look to when they kind of adopt one of these networks or participate in one of these networks. All right, question here from, and this name's pretty funny, Dildo Baggins, who says, you mentioned a series of basic OPSEC measures in a recent refuel. I was hoping you could go into a bit deeper detail into this, into the more advanced measures. So I haven't prepared anything, but I'll go off what's off what I've got on top of my head. So essentially, there are a few basic things you can do. The most basic thing for OPSEC within crypto is get a hardware wallet. Ledger Nano S or a Lattice One. Just get one, because if you're just using a naked MetaMask, that means you have all of your funds in MetaMask and you're using that to transact. Well, you're exposing yourself to a wide range of attacks, right? If you get malware on your PC and that malware contains something that can get into your MetaMask or can keylog you, and when you type in your MetaMask password, or can man in the middle attack your MetaMask transactions, what that means is essentially when you send the MetaMask transaction, it replaces it with an attacker's one. All that stuff can happen. So you definitely want to get a hardware wallet to protect against that sort of stuff, because what a hardware wallet does is it basically keeps your private key on the little device. So it's an actual physical hardware device. Ledger Nano S looks like a USB key, and the Lattice one is a bit more involved. It's a bit bigger. It's got a screen and everything like that, and it's got a bunch of other security features too. And what ends up happening is that you can still use it with MetaMask. You can do like a pass through, and what happens is that you'll submit the transaction on MetaMask, and then it sends the transaction to your hardware wallet, and you sign it on your hardware wallet using your private key. And your private key never leaves that device. It's actually on a chip called a secure enclave on the hardware wallet, which means that you're protected against your private key being stolen or anything like that. And then obviously you have like a seed phrase as your backup. When you set up a hardware wallet, they give you a seed phrase. You write this down on a piece of paper. You do not put this into a computer, because if you put it into a computer and someone accesses your computer one day, they can get access to these words, which is called a seed phrase or a secret phrase. And what this does is it allows you or an attacker that gets access to this information to recreate all of your Ethereum wallets and have access to all of your funds. So you never ever want those words to be seen by anyone but yourself or anyone that you have trusted to kind of like see those words, see those words. Maybe it's in your will or something like that. So that's the first thing. And then with the hardware wallet as well, when you're signing the transaction, this is a weakness of Ledger. They don't actually show you the whole transaction that you're signing, whereas a Lattice 1 does, where when you submit the transaction to your Lattice 1, it will actually show on there that this is the transaction that you're doing. You're actually sending these amount of funds to this address. And if it's a smart contract interaction, it'll show you the details of that as well. Whereas with Ledger, it won't show you all the details. So what ends up happening is you can be man-in-the-middle attacked as well, where someone can inject a transaction that into your, like MetaMask, for example, when you're trying to send one, and replace that one, and then you accidentally sign it with your hardware wallet, and then you weren't even protected in the first place. So that's kind of like the number one thing that everyone should do. If you do not have a hardware wallet and you have more than a couple $100 or maybe a few $100 to justify the price of the hardware wallet in crypto, then you're just playing with fire in my eyes. So that's kind of like the first thing. The second thing is that you definitely want to have some firewall, which pretty much like every Windows PC and Mac comes with like firewalls enabled by default. You want to have that on. That's basic protection. You want to have Windows Defender if you're using Windows as like an antivirus software. I don't really use things like Norton and other stuff like that. I just use Windows Defender. And I have a bunch of other things on there as well. I mean, I used to work in cybersecurity, so there's a bunch of more advanced stuff that I do that I'm not going to go over now because it gets really involved. It's got to do with like setting up your router to only accept like certain incoming connections and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of complex stuff going on there. I'm not going to go into that, but you don't even need to do that anyway. I do that because of my presence in the ecosystem. I'm probably more likely to be targeted than most, unfortunately. But a hardware wallet works to protect you against pretty much like most attacks, which I think is really important there. And then, as I said, you want to essentially make sure that any backups of your hardware wallets, like seed phrases and all the secret phrases and things like that, are written down on a physical piece of paper, or you can get these things. Actually, you can buy them. They're basically these metal things where you can essentially like engrave your not engrave. Sorry, you can basically how do I describe it correctly? There's letters you can basically rearrange that form the words in these kind of like metal plates that essentially have your secret phrase on there, because obviously, and they're fire resistant, because obviously with a piece of paper it can be burned if there's a fire in your house, or you can lose it, or it can get damaged some other way. So with these things, they're fire resistant, they're water protected, they're protected against all sorts of things. So that's a really great way of storing it. But also maybe you want to buy a safe too, because if you buy a safe and you put your kind of like your seed phrase in there, well, then it's a lot harder for someone to kind of steal that and things like that. Or you can do like decoy things where you can have like a fake secret phrase. So if someone breaks into your house, they take the fake one instead of the real one. You can get really advanced with this sort of stuff. Or you could split up the phrase as well, where you can give 12. It's usually like 12 or 24 words. So you can give half of that to a trusted family member. You keep half for yourself. And then when you want to, use the backup, you basically go to them and say, hey, I need that. Can I have it, please? And then you put them together and you basically get your full phrase again. So there's lots of different little things you can do like that. There are more comprehensive guides out there. My Crypto has a lot of coverage on security and how to protect yourself. So definitely go check out My Crypto's blog. They got a lot of different blog posts on there with much more kind of like advanced stuff happening there. So, but hopefully that gives you just like a pretty high level overview of what you can do. But as I said, hardware wallet is a number one thing that everyone listening to this should do right now. Literally go right now to like Ledger's website, or Grid Plus Lattice is what it's called, their website as well. Check it out, buy it, set it up and move your funds onto there. That's the easiest way to protect yourself without getting too complicated about things. All right, so a question here from Ben Fallows who says, should I move my ETH to Arbitrum Optimism instead of leaving it on Ethereum where fees may rise so high in the future that it isn't cost effective to remove them? So this is a funny question, actually. It depends, right? Like, I think it is funny because if you think about these L2s, they're going to have bridges to centralized exchanges. So if you were to put your ETH onto Optimism, for example, and then there's an Optimism centralized exchange bridge, and then you can send it there to cash out, then yeah, maybe it's worth it if you kind of plan to, I guess, move these funds later on, cash them out to fiat, or I guess you want to do more stuff with it, then yeah, that does make sense to kind of move to these L2s. But also there was a proposal, not a proposal, but there was a discussion, I think, a while back that was happening where essentially I think there was some researchers in the Ethereum community discussing, hey, what if we did something where we basically unfroze everyone's funds on L1 that were frozen because it costs more to move them than it does the value of the actual funds on there. And the way this would work was that essentially it would basically move all those funds to L2. And the problem with this is how do you know which L2 to move them to? This means you're actually touching user funds, right? And you're actually moving user funds without their consent and things like that. So obviously that idea probably wouldn't work in practice and probably wouldn't actually happen in practice, to be honest. But that was just a funny little kind of discussion there, how to do this. So I guess, yeah, the TLDR is definitely, if you're worried about the fees getting too high, move your funds to an L2 and they should be good there. But you are moving them into something that has security trade-offs, because as I've said many different times on the refuels, Arbitrum and Optimism are completely centralized, and they will be for quite a while because they have admin keys, they have upgradable contracts, they are not at their final stage just yet, they're very early, there's risks associated with them, but if you're comfortable with that sort of stuff, then yeah, feel free to do that. But if you, at the same time, and I think it's funny that I'm actually saying this, I would actually say at this early stage, it might even be worth just sending your funds to a centralized exchange like Coinbase and keeping them there if you're worried about things pricing you out of layer one. Because as I said, Arbitrum and Optimism are still very early. You're going to have the same risk profile because it's centralized as well. And things like that. But I guess with Arbitrum and Optimism, you also have the option of withdrawing your funds on L1 if their L2s go down because they are a true L2. So yeah, there's a few different trade-offs here to consider. But if you're really concerned, yeah, I guess move to L2 or maybe even a centralized exchange if it's something that you're going to sell in the foreseeable future as well. All right, a couple of questions here from Brian Peace. So first one, you mentioned that the last major upgrade on the roadmap after the merge will be snarkifying the base layer. Can you explain what this means? So I wouldn't say it's the last major upgrade. It really is more one of the long-term upgrades over the next 5 to 10 years. Who knows what the last upgrade is going to be, on last major upgrade on the roadmap. I'm pretty sure the Ethereum researchers are just going to keep adding items to that roadmap forever. But essentially what I mean by snarkifying the base layer, Snark or SNARK, they're a kind of a cryptographic proof similar to Starks, and this is basically what's a zero knowledge proof. This is very similar to ZK, right? Like ZK Starks, ZK Snarks. And Snark is an acronym. I don't remember what it stands for right now. But essentially what it means is being able to do, I guess, a similar thing that you do on L2 to compress transactions to get more scalability on the base layer. I think Vitalik wrote a post in 2018, maybe if I'm remembering correctly, where he said that we could potentially get 500 transactions per second on layer 1 by snarkifying the base layer. So on each shard, it would apply to each shard, but essentially today, each shard would have 15 transactions per second, or example, ETH1 has 15 transactions per second, or probably a bit more than that because the gas limit went up to 15 million a while ago. But what could happen is that we could get that all the way up to 500 transactions per second by snarkifying the base layer. And the technical details are very advanced because this is all advanced cryptography. So I don't understand how it works under the hood. But at a higher level, it's basically compressing these transactions like you do on layer 2 to kind of eke out more scalability there. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. And your second question, you've mentioned that we need to decentralize the full stack, hosting with IPFS and Filecoin, more anon devs, etc. This made me wonder, is GitHub a point of vulnerability? Are these important code bases backed up elsewhere? yes, GitHub is definitely a point of vulnerability for all these projects. They should have local backups, or they should be using a decentralized storage solution to store these sorts of things. They already do, I think, but it's funny when you think about like the Ethereum code base. Well, that's just Ethereum, right? Like if you're running an Ethereum full node and you're running the software, then you have Ethereum, and if it goes down on GitHub, you can kind of recreate it from there. But definitely, we want as many projects that exist on GitHub to have backups, and those backups to be created whenever the I guess like repository changes on GitHub. So yeah, good question there. There's a few kind of like projects working on decentralized GitHubs and kind of like these sorts of things. I think the one that is the most popular is called, oh man, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I know there's one out there. It's very popular, and it's being used, I think, by various devs. I can't remember exactly the name now, and it's going to drive me crazy that I can't remember what the name is now, but yeah, there is definitely one out there. If anyone knows it, feel free to just put it in like the chat in the AMA series channel there. But yeah, there is projects kind of working on this as well right now. All right, next one comes from Matt, who says, in your opinion, is it still working towards 32 ETH and staking with your own node? I mean, yes, if you can afford it. Like, that's as simple as that. I mean, I can't tell someone to go, hey, go buy 32 ETH for $100,000 just so you can stake on your own. I mean, it's so out of reach for most people now, and I understand that, and it's just unfortunate that that's the way it is. But hopefully some of these decentralized staking solutions like Rocket Pool work out. We're gonna have to see how that plays out. But I still think it's worth working towards 32 ETH if you can. If you can't, well, then that's fine too. Just like if you want to buy, as much ETH as you can, then do that as well. But that's totally up to you. But I do realize that it's now out of reach, and it's going to continue to be out of reach for most people. I mean, I obviously expect the ETH price to go much higher from where it is today. So do a lot of people. And, maybe it gets to a day where the minimum ETH amount gets reduced. Maybe it gets reduced to something like 16 ETH instead of 32 ETH. But even then, still out of the reach for most people. And this is done for security. This isn't done to exclude people. This is done because of the fact that we need a security bond on there. And it's also based on the validator count. So, I mean, without getting too technical here, it's basically a way to load balance the validators on the beacon chain. But yeah, I guess like TLDR, it's worth working towards it. Don't feel too bad if you can't get there. It is a lot of money these days, and I totally understand if people can't get to 32 ETH. All right, so one here from Alice Coltrane, who says, when will there be Ethereum marketing? What does decentralized marketing look like? There will never be centralized Ethereum marketing or a centralized push from any kind of body like the Ethereum Foundation or Consensus or anything like that. We already have a decentralized marketing community within Ethereum. Everyone on Twitter talking about Ethereum is Ethereum's marketing arm. Everyone producing educational content, whether that be the Daily Gwei, ETHUB, Bankless, the DeFi Dad, countless others out there. They are marketing Ethereum. Every project that is doing marketing for their own project is marketing Ethereum. All of that coming together, that is what decentralized marketing is. You have thousands, tens of thousands of different people, all marketing different things, all coming back to home base being Ethereum. That is kind of like what it is. You're never going to see places like the Ethereum Foundation do big marketing pushes or anything like that. They may give grants to some of these people that do marketing as like part of their kind of like orthogonal kind of activities. But yeah, that's kind of like how marketing works within Ethereum. And, you'll see mainstream media cover Ethereum as well. That's marketing. So yeah, there's just no centralized push there. And it's really cool that we already have like a pretty, decentralized marketing ecosystem within Ethereum. All right, next question from Dumplings, who says, is it worth getting an ENS address and how do I do it? I think so, yes. You can do it by just going to the ENS website. You can just Google that. And on there, you can just like register your own kind of like ENS, tie it to your Ethereum address. But I would caution against doing it unless you want everything tied to that address being public. So if you give that Ethereum, that ENS name to someone, they'll be able to see everything that is happening on that address because they can go on Etherscan and look through it and everything like that. Same with anyone else. Like for example, sassel.eth is my public ENS address. I accidentally claimed my Gitcoin airdropped with my sassel.eth address. So now everyone can see my really big Gitcoin airdrop on there. And I'm obviously not a fan of that, but what can I do? So you have to be really careful about these things, and you have to be careful not to tie your ENS address to another public address that you've got, another private address that you've got, because then it's automatically made public as well. But yeah, generally I think it's worth it if you take all those things into consideration. And as I said, you can get one by going to by just Googling ENS and or the Ethereum name service, and it'll come up with the website there, and you'll be able to kind of like do it there. So a question here from Con Limani, I think that's how you say it. Can you talk about competing Senate amendments and impact on the ETH ecosystem? Oh, okay, this is the regulation stuff. Yeah, we went through this at the start of this AMA, but essentially, like the TLDR is that there's 2 competing amendments right now. It's being voted on today. I don't know if it's being voted on yet, but essentially, one of them is really bad for crypto. One of them's okay for crypto. We want the one that's okay for crypto to go in, and obviously, we want the one that's really bad for crypto not to go in. The one that's really bad for crypto, it only exempts proof of work from the new kind of like regulations. Not proof of stake or any of the other kind of activities, but the one that's good for crypto, or at least okay for crypto, covers a much broader kind of like set of actors within the ecosystem. So one here from Brit. Are you familiar with the UMA project? I would love to hear your take on what they do, as many folks find it a bit confusing to wrap their head around. I know of the UMA project. I wouldn't say I'm knowledgeable enough to give like a full breakdown, but essentially they're a synthetic asset project where you can basically create synthetic assets for anything, essentially. And what a synthetic asset is it's basically, for example, when you put ETH into Maker to mint DAI, you're minting a synthetic US dollar, because a DAI is like an asset created by backing it with ETH, and it is pegged to a dollar, so you can say it's creating a synthetic dollar. Then, for example, on the synthetics ecosystem, if you put ETH in there, or you put SNX in there as collateral, you can mint, say, S Tesla, which is a synthetic representation of Tesla, obviously the Tesla stock, which means it is not actual Tesla stock. It's just like a price ticker, essentially, where an oracle updates the price of it. By holding a synthetic Tesla, you get exposure to the Tesla price, and you can also use it within the ecosystem. So same for UMA. I know the UMA is doing a bunch of other kind of things in this ecosystem too, but I haven't dived too deep into that project specifically, so I can't probably give too much color there. But hopefully that answers, like from a high level, what like a synthetic asset is and what synthetic asset protocols kind of do. All right, a question here from Morgan, who says, do you think L1 NFTs are inherently more valuable than Polygon or other L2 NFTs? Okay, yeah, I answered this earlier as well from another person. If you're just watching this on YouTube, you can check out the timestamps to get the answer to your question. I'm just scrolling through my list here to see who asked that question. I think it was Andreas. So if you go to the question asked by Andreas, if you're looking at the timestamps, you'll be able to find the answer to that question, Morgan. All right, one here from Lloyd Banksy, who says, can you please explain the business model for Gitcoin? I don't get how they intend on monetizing, which I assume is an expectation of GTC holders. So I don't think there's like a business model that's kind of like being developed just yet. I think it's really up to the GTC token holders, the DAO, and everything like that. I can't really speak to anything because I haven't seen anything materialize in that area. In terms of like Gitcoin, the DAO's business model, as I said, that's determined by GTC holders or like community members. In terms of Gitcoin, the kind of like core team building it, they could do different things to monetize and stuff like that, and like different business models. But generally, I would, if I had to guess, I would suspect that taking a fee from transactions on the Gitcoin kind of like protocol, like Gitcoin grants and stuff like that. But, who knows, right? Like you'd have to read the Gitcoin governance forum to see if they've been talking about this. I haven't been following it too closely, but I don't think anything like concrete has materialized just yet in that area. All right, final question on my sheet, and then I think I have some more on the Discord channel. But essentially, Dim Sum asks, please do the Daily Gwei intro. Okay. All right, I'll do the Daily Gwei intro just for you, and then I'll move on to some other questions. So let me just get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel. I'm your host. Oh, shit. I actually screwed it up. I had never screwed up that intro before, and now I'm screwing it up because I'm not in my normal kind of flow here. Jesus. Sorry. I'll go through it again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today is the 9th of August, 2021. I think I screwed up the date there, actually. But yeah, hopefully that satisfied your needs, Dim Sum. I'm sure all of you have heard that many times on the refuel before. Okay, I got a few other questions here on the channel that I'm going to be answering, and then we can probably wrap it up unless anyone else has other questions. So one here from M Titus 6, who says, how long until wallets will be ready for EIP 1559? This is going to be a gradual process. I think MetaMask said they're going to be rolling out to most users next week. A lot of other wallets have support already, like MyCrypto. I think Rainbow Wallet has support. I mean, generally, they'll be supporting it over the coming weeks. I mean, I guess that's the kind of like broad answer I can give here. But I guess MetaMask is the most important since most of us use that. They're rolling it out next week. One here from On the Ball who says, how do you think NFT prices will react to rising or falling ETH prices? This is hard to tell, actually. Sometimes the NFTs priced in ETH, like CryptoPunks, do really well, whether ETH's going up or down. But it's like, over the long term, just generally, it's really hard to outperform ETH, right, by buying any asset. So it's going to be really hard to see or really difficult to know, like, which NFTs hold their value in ETH versus which don't. Because I think a lot of the NFTs issued today are just money grabs, really, and people are just speculating on them as well. So they may just like trade back to ETH. So they'll probably end up losing their value in ETH. But things like CryptoPunks and some other ones out there, they may outperform ETH because of various different reasons that I gave before about why CryptoPunks are valuable. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question there. All right, so one here from Max8 who says, how to value NFTs, just your perspective for new ones trying to get a taste of it. So it's really hard because, as I said, a lot of the NFTs these days are either money grabs or they are just being speculated on, and they're just kind of resemble a pump and dump sometimes, if I would use that term. So that's kind of like how I'm viewing a lot of them. But in terms of the ones that I do value, something like a CryptoPunk, I have one punk that I kind of minted from the contract in 2017. I didn't buy any others, but I was going to buy more earlier this year. I just didn't end up doing it. And that was because NFTs to me are valued mostly on their lore or culture surrounding the NFT. That's why I think CryptoPunks are so popular and so valuable, is that there's a very good story behind it. It's obviously very scarce. There are various different kind of punks you can own, and people kind of like make punks their identity, and it's kind of like your digital identity sort of thing. So that's kind of like how I look at NFT projects in terms of like collectibles. But then there's other NFT projects like NFTs as part of video games, and that's even harder because you're betting on the game being popular too when you buy these NFTs. So hopefully that just gives like a high-level perspective there. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on how they value NFTs, especially when it comes to the art NFTs. I would follow someone like DC Investor. He has a knack for it. But art NFTs, like, I really don't know. I'm not into art at all. Like, I really just do not know how to value those things. And some of the things that I'm seeing, I'm just like, wow, why is anyone paying this for this? So, yeah. Your next point here is that DeFi and NFT collaboration, bridging coexistence for the future. Yes, I think so. And I think we're already seeing this happen. There's various projects out there that I would consider to be DeFi, such as the NFTX protocol, which basically allows people to add liquidity to their indexes and trade NFTs. There's Fractional, which allows people to split up their NFTs and trade them on open markets. Plenty of collaboration in the DeFi and NFT space happening already and going to be happening in the future. And your last question, any technical hindrance for NFT lending on DeFi protocols? I don't think technical. I think it's pretty easily technically implemented. It's more about the economical side of it. So obviously when you use an NFT as collateral on a lending protocol, what ends up happening is that the lending protocol needs to be sure that it can liquidate that NFT to cover your debt if the time comes. So liquidity is obviously the biggest issue there when it comes to that sort of stuff. But Aave is working on that. So I think that's really cool there. So hopefully that answers your questions, Max. All right, on to one from Project 2501. If you have a ledger currently, but then get a Lattice one, when you set up the Lattice one with the ledger wallet seed phrase, does that make the ledger redundant, or can you still use both the ledger and the Lattice one for the same wallet, or will it cause a conflict on MetaMask, or generally if swapping between them, using them interchangeably? It shouldn't cause a conflict. You'll be able to use both of them. You can test this as well with like different ledgers if you have multiple ledgers, because you're just basically using the same kind of like private keys and same addresses in different areas. So yeah, no, it doesn't erase the other one. You can still use it from both essentially. Marco says GitLab or decentralized GitHub, GitHuman. No, it's a specific crypto project. I can't remember the exact name. I'm sure I'll find it later. Oh man, what is it? It's oh man, it launched the other day too, and I'm getting annoyed now that I can't remember it, but it'll come to me. Hippopotamus says, any thoughts on the practical usage of ETH IRL? I have the ability to add crypto payments as an option on a checkout used by thousands of people nationwide in the US. If only Stripe offered an integration. I want to do my part, but there is no clear solution. I don't think ETH is going to be a good currency, to be honest. I really do think that ETH is going to be a really great collateral asset and a really great staking asset, but I don't really think that you'll be using ETH as money. I mean, I think ETH can be used as money, but I think like as we go forward, obviously stable coins are going to be the preferred method of like money and currency and all that sort of stuff. But I think the advantage of using ETH as money in some countries is that it's actually tax exempt under a certain amount. So I know in Australia, the last time I checked, at least, I hope this is still true. But if you use your crypto to purchase something and it's under a $10,000 purchase, you're exempt from capital gains tax on that. So if you made a capital gain on that ETH, you're basically able to get exempt from that. So you don't have to pay tax on that because you've actually used it to purchase something. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers your question. I think in terms of like a clear solution for how people are going to use crypto generally in real life, I think it's just going to be stable coins really at the end of the day, in terms of like using it as money and stuff like that. All right, Think Decade. Last question here. They say, any thought on the DyDx blacklisting US citizens on the airdrop? If decentralized protocols are able to blacklist users from a particular geographic location, are they really decentralized? I spoke about this on the Refuel last week, and I actually went on a bit of a rant about this, but I wasn't targeting the rant at DyDx. I was targeting at the US regulations. I'm not going to go on the rant again. You can go watch the Refuel if you want to see me rant on about the regulations there. But to answer your specific question, if it's actually decentralized, well, I mean, it's funny because the issuance of the token isn't decentralized, right? Like the DyDx issuing their token, they're doing it centrally. They're doing it as part of like the DyDx Foundation, whatever they're calling it. So the protocol itself can still be decentralized, but the token, being issued in a centralized way at one point of time can be okay. Like if you think about it, the Ethereum ICO was done in a centralized way because it was managed by a centralized party, being the Ethereum Foundation. And that didn't mean that Ethereum was centralized. So I think there's definitely this distinction to be made there. But there's a lot of other things you can kind of like point to for centralization, like DyDx basically maintains total control over their layer 2 protocol that they've got right now because there's no token, so there's no way to decentralize it just yet, and they have like admin and upgrade keys and all that sort of stuff. And even though you can like get your funds back on layer 2, they still have ways to kind of mess with it if they wanted to. And just generally with DeFi, I mean, there's so many different things when you consider what's decentralized, what's not. And most of it isn't decentralized today, and simply because we're very early for a lot of these protocols as well. But I have never thought about who the token gets airdropped to as really one of those things, because once the token airdrop is done, then it's done, right? There's no more kind of like, unless the team has a backdoor in the token contract or whatever, they can't do anything from then on. They've sent the tokens out, people have the tokens, that's kind of it. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And the last question here actually from Tuna is a follow-up question about DyDx. Any price guess on the token? No, I've got no idea. I mean, if you want to do a comparable, go look at Perpetual Exchange's market cap and compare it to DyDx, because Perpetual Protocol is a layer 2 perpetual protocol that is similar to DyDx. If you want to do a comparable market cap to them, then that's kind of like maybe something that you can do. But like, I have no idea what the token price will be. Especially because it depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on what kind of market the token starts trading in. Is the market going to be really hot? It depends like what exchanges list it. Like, is Coinbase going to list it on day one, sort of thing? And it depends, on how much people kind of like sell on the first day, sell their airdrops, like how volatile it's going to be. There's a lot of different things to consider. But if you want to do a comparable, valuation, you can go look at Perpetual Protocol on CoinMarketCap, look at their fully diluted valuation, and then kind of like map that to DyDx and see what happens there. All right, I think that is it for the AMA. Unless anyone has any last final questions, you can put up your hand. I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. So I'll give like 10 seconds and then I'll wrap it up. All right, I lied. I'm not going to wait 10 seconds. I'm going to wrap it up since no one is raising their hand. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending the 7th Daily Gwei AMA. If you came in late, you can definitely check this out on YouTube. It'll be uploaded within 24 hours with timestamps. And the next one will be 2 weeks from now. So yes, thank you everyone. I'll see you in the Discord channel.